And if you remarked upon my recent growth of facial hair, you look just like your father did with that beard, someone said. I answered back, I am him, even though my old man's dead. I didn't want to be him. Well, at first I did. When I loved and looked up to him as a little kid. He sent me to his old school. I was a numeral with his name. He gave me this gold signet ring and he wore one just the same. I guess that I believed him. Probably it was true. When he told me I was just like him, that's what some fathers do. But a father's always older, and my dad was rather tall. Who says size doesn't matter? He was big and I was small. I needed to be big enough to be someone someday. And I learned I had to beat him. That was the only way. I learned I had to fight him. My own flesh, blood, bone, and kin. But I felt I was just like him. Can a man's son be his twin? First we fought for my mother, that afforded little joy. When he left, she was heartbroken. I was still their little boy. But I started to get bigger in the windy, ugly game. When I made a little money, I got a bit of fame, and I saw how this could work. This could do the trick. If I made it big enough, I could kill him off quick. But how can you murder someone in a way that they don't die? I didn't want to kill him. That would be suicide. I got frightened and I backed off. I let up, I was through. And in the end he did himself in. Usually that's what we do. I'm alive and he is dead and neither of us won. It's spoiled for the victor once the vanquishing is done. A man becomes immortal through his daughter or his son. When he fears his legacy, man can come undone. And the beard is a reminder I'm a living part of him. Although my father's dead and gone, I'm his surviving twin. Although the old man's dead and gone, I'm his surviving twin.
Wow. That's the first time I've heard that song without crying. Seriously.
It's going great, Rick.
Yeah. Well, songs are short, books are long. How did you come to write a book?
Well, it's somewhat related to that song in that that's the title track to a theater piece that I have called Surviving Twin, and that I've been doing in different places and theaters for about 5 years. And a guy called Peter Gethers, who works at Random House, he's a writer and an editor, saw the show and said, "You have a book in you," which sounded like a medical diagnosis. And then then they gave me some money and I wrote a book. It took about 3 years, and that's how it went.
Now, As the Roman numeral in your name suggests, you're not the first Loudon Wainwright. Who was Loudon S. Wainwright? Also known as Loudon Wainwright Jr., also known as Loudon Wainwright, also known as your father.
Well, he was...
I already know the answer in a way because I was a fan of his before I was a fan of yours.
He was a writer, a journalist primarily, but he was also an essayist. He had a column in Life magazine for many years. He wrote over 200 columns throughout the 1960s and 70s and 80s. The name of the column was The View from Here. And in those years, particularly in the 60s and 70s, Life magazine was on every coffee table and in every barber shop, everywhere. So I grew up with a famous father, which was difficult for me. But that's who he was. I mean, that was his job and his public persona. I mean, as a guy, as a person, I observed a more complicated, conflicted fellow. But he was a great writer, I think.
Yeah, I agree with you. And you mentioned in Surviving Twin, I remember not in the book, I think, though, that Philip Cohnhart of Life and your father are the ones who came up with one of the most famous issues of Life. I mean, I don't know if there's anybody here that's under about 35, they probably don't understand what a big deal Life magazine was. What a huge, huge deal it was. It really was everywhere. And every issue was an event. So when your father and Cohnhart came up with the idea of one week publishing the photographs of all the American soldiers who had been killed that week in the Vietnam War, that was as big a deal as when Walter Cronkite said, "No more," about the war too. Yeah. Did you really appreciate that fully at the time?
Not enough. I mean, at that time, my father and I were, I was kind of not reading his columns because I was a rebellious guy who wanted to be his own guy. But now I talk about it in my book that was a huge, not only because it was an amazing idea that Phil Cohnhart and my dad came up with, but because Life magazine, it was it was a great magazine, but it was rather conservative politically. I mean, and so it was, to have something like that in Life was in itself a big deal. And the mail that they received, and they got bags of it about printing these, they printed the photographs, the names, and the hometowns of these young men. And the mail, people were enraged, and then people were just so grateful and happy that they had done this thing.
It's a wonderful thing to do. One thing I hadn't known before we set this up, and I should have known, is that your dad had 3 stories in the New Yorker at the beginning of his career. And the first one came out in 1947 when you were about a year old. And for another year or so they appeared, and then they went away. They're all rather bleak stories. Compared to the essays that you have chosen for the book. And this is one of the best things about this book, of many best things, is that Loudon chose a half dozen of his father's columns, and they are salted through the book. And they're on they're on gray pages, so you can find them quickly if you're leafing through it. And it's amazing how many of them, not certainly in style and not in informality, but they touch on many of the same subjects with many of the same emotions that you do.
Yeah.
So did you kind of rediscover these at some point?
Yeah, and the point was about, well, now it's 8 years ago or something. I was in Maine, and I staying in a place that had a kind of rustic cabin type place, and there was an old magazine rack, and there was a Life magazine. Tricia Nixon was on the cover, I remember.
Mm-hmm.
It's from 1971, and I opened it up thinking that I might find one of my dad's columns. He wrote over 200 columns, some of which I had never read, but I found a column that I had read and had loved. The column's called Another Sort of Love Story, which is about having to put our dog, the family dog, down. Love Story, the movie and the book were a big thing in 1971. And I just was so moved and laughing and crying, and just knocked me out. Mm. And then I kind of methodically went about reading all the columns. You know, at the age of 50, or I was in my 60s when I read them, all of them. And I found some letters that he'd written also. And anyway, so that was the beginning. I read those New Yorker stories. I particularly liked the one he wrote about the boarding school football game where the father and the mother come down to see the son, and the son screws up. You could probably find it online. We even thought about including that story in the book, but we didn't. But it's a great story, and
you can if you're a New Yorker subscriber, you can, with some effort, find these 3 stories. You're entitled to look at every page of every New Yorker ever published, and that one, the one you're talking about, I mean, it's sort of it has a little bit of a Holden Caulfield feeling from another direction, and it is about a father who's insensitive and thoughtless and arrogant about his son.
Yeah.
Now, where in the world did he come up with that?
His father, who I never met because he died when he was 43, when my dad was 17, was a real hard ass, uptight, apparently, you know, and my dad was an only child, so I think he took a lot of heat from his father. And yeah, and the school where the football game, I know it was the same school, the same boarding school that both of he and I went
and
to.
You played football there.
I did play football, and he came down to see me play football, although he was much nicer than the father in that short story.
Yeah, well, it was many years later.
Yes.
What position did you play?
I was a halfback.
Cool.
Number 22, high scorer in the conference.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, it was not a great football. It wasn't a machine. The St. Andrews football team was, you know, it wasn't a great.
The league? Was Millbrook in that league?
No, they were too far away. It was mostly schools in Maryland and Wilmington, Delaware. Our arch rival was the Tower Hill School.
Well, but that wasn't what you did in high school. That was not athletic. Seems to have been what planted the seeds for the master of many arts that you are now.
Well, I was in the school plays, which was I liked more than anything. You know, every year there was one school play in this boys' boarding school, and I was determined to be. And I was in it all the 4 years that I was there. And then the other thing I did was I played the guitar, and was in folk bands and jug bands. I loved jug band music, the Jim Kweskin jug band. So we emulated them. And that's when I strapped on a guitar and started to play for people at school dances. And so that was an important thing.
Why didn't you go the rock and roll route?
I liked rock and roll. You know, the first record I bought was All Shook Up by Elvis, and I loved Fats Domino and Jerry Lee Lewis. But in the early 60s, which is when I was going to this boarding school, the folk boom was happening. And so that would be Bob Dylan, probably first and foremost for, somebody like me, and Pete Seeger and Phil Oakes and the Jug Band and Ramblin' Jack Elliott. And I found all those characters kind of more interesting. So I never really got an electric guitar. I just stayed with acoustic. I went and saw them all at the Newport Folk Festival, and those were my musical heroes.
Were you pissed off when Dylan went electric?
No, I was there, and I at the Newport show when he plugged in, and I was in the camp that loved it. And my favorite Dylan records are those, Blonde on Blonde and Bringing It All Back Home and Highway 61. I liked that change.
Now, one big difference between you and Dylan is that he writes and sings songs about things that he never experienced and had nothing to do really with where he came from. And your songs are about your life, largely, and the lives of people like you. And they create a body of work that's like Faulkner or something like that. Have you? I guess Dead Skunk maybe is sort of
it's
in between.
It's so Faulkner-esque, right? Dead Skunk.
Yeah.
It's my As I Lay Dying.
How many people here remember Dead Skunk? How many don't remember Dead Skunk?
This young lady here sure doesn't.
All right. Actually, I never heard it until I'd heard a lot of your other stuff, and then I read about Dead Skunk, and I thought, I wonder what that sounds like.
It's a pretty good record.
It's a nice song, really.
It's a silly song, and I continue to write silly songs, and I'm happy about that. Yeah. I always wanted to make people laugh, and was a show off and a class clown, and I still do that in my show. But the song is not one of my good songs, really. You really like it, don't you, Rick? Should I have started with Dead Skunk?
Sure, I like it. Yeah, well, I'd be hard pressed to find one I didn't like.
Yeah.
But were there other kinds of music that fed into your style? I mean, for example, were any of these school plays musicals?
No.
Did you ever perform in a musical?
No,
Did you ever think about performing?
No, well, as an adult, I was in a musical called Pump Boys and Dinettes, which actually was on Broadway, but that was playing an acoustic guitar and being a gas station attendant, something that I knew nothing about. It's a big stretch for me. But as a kid, I wasn't in any musicals, but I was in the school plays. But I was very affected by that kind of writing, the pop, the musical theater, Rodgers and Hammerstein, Frank Lesser, Lerner and Lowe, because those records were in my parents' record collection. And as a kid, me and my sisters and brother would listen to those records and act them out in the living room. My Fair Lady or Peter Pan or what I consider to be the greatest one, which is Guys and Dolls. So that kind of writing and music, thanks to my father for that record collection.
Actually, I had a copy of your book, and I forgot to bring it out here. That has little notes in it. It's in the book. Yeah, could you go get it? You can see I'm not a professional interviewer. I'm an essayist too, like your dad. What percentage of, forgive me for being so curious about him, but fine. I feel like a combination, I feel like my life or my mind is a kind of combination of his and yours, which is one of the reasons, I guess, that Surviving Twin hits me right in the middle of the target. I mean, just absolutely, God, is it good. I hope you consider that one of your good ones.
Yeah. It's one of the good ones. Unfortunately, I never got to play it for my father. I wrote it after he died. In fact, when I really started to write I made a record called Surviving Twins on a record I made called Last Man on Earth, and which is I consider to be one of my really good records. And then right after my father died, I made a record. I recorded and wrote a record called History, which has a lot of father-son stuff. But he never got to hear any of those records.
You've written an enormous number of songs, haven't you?
I think I've written a couple of hundred. Yeah.
You never counted?
I haven't ever counted it. I mean, I think maybe I got if you figure there's 12 songs on an album and I've made 27 records. So
that's more in the 300
Okay,
range.
so I've written even more than I thought.
And does that even count your topical newspaper songs?
Well, I've written a lot of songs that there was an album of topical songs called Social Studies, but there were a lot of songs that I've written that haven't been recorded. Maybe because they're not good enough or they didn't fit in a particular record. You know, they're trying to make a record that has a tone to it.
You mean they haven't been released?
Yeah.
They have been recorded?
There's demos of them and things, but they haven't been out on albums.
So maybe your heirs will bring them to our attention.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
I wanted... I found lines in the pieces of your dad's that you put in the book to be, they felt like they had something to do with you. And here's, and not really consciously exactly. Well, here's one from, this is from the piece that he wrote about getting a suit made in London. And actually, when I heard you read that piece, it was out of context. I didn't know where it was from. And I thought you had written it. I figured this was when you had made some money with the skunk, and so you went to a Savile Row tailor and you got this, and it really did sound like your voice.
That's amazing, yeah.
But here's the line that I popped out. It's a lovely piece. Looking for the first time at my new suit, I felt much the same horror I'd felt at the first sight of my eldest son. He'd looked very raw to me through the nursery window, and so did the suit, the jacket scarred with basting thread, the pockets missing or sewn shut. Here's one for you. You want a couple more?
Yeah, I'm digging this.
Here's one from his piece celebrating Mickey Mantle. And it's
a vulgar tribute to greatness.
It was a piece of reporting about this grotesque tribute that they put on for Mickey Mantle, with all kinds of cheeseball gifts and talks and speeches. And it's about that, and it's about how Mantle's dignity survived all that beautifully. And could this have been a dig at you? The warmth and honesty of that noise, that is of the crowd cheering, was far greater than I've ever heard in a concert hall or a convention. That's a stretch, right?
No, I think he was thinking about the Judy Garland concert. He might have seen it.
Well, that's
a beautiful piece. I love that piece.
It is a beautiful piece. Yeah, all the ones you've chosen are beautiful, and there must have been a lot that you wanted, that you would have liked to include.
Yeah, when my dad died, he lived the last 20 years or so of his life with a woman who's also a writer called Martha Fay, who's a friend of our family's. And Martha and I talked, we got to collect the columns and put them out in a book, and then we never did it, and that, so it's great that I love the idea that some of his work is in the book. He should have his own book. But.
How typical are these of his? I mean, were most of his pieces commentaries on the political scene, or?
I'd say so. Most of them were about what was going on politically, or he wrote criticism. He wrote about movies he liked and didn't like. The first column he wrote was about Dr. Strangelove, which he loved, and it's a great, funny, good column. But he wrote about the Kennedy administration and the problems with what was going on in the world. And those columns, because they are of that time, I don't think they travel as well as the stuff the personal stuff.
Well, I do remember. I mean, I completely remember reading them as a kid, and thinking, what is this doing in Life magazine? Thinking these were kind of literary, relaxed essays.
Yeah.
And they could not be more different from pictures with captions.
Yeah.
So here's one from his. From the piece you mentioned about the death of your dog, of the family dog, which is almost as big a tearjerker as surviving twin. But try this. In his late years, speaking of the dog, of course, in his late years he was treated roughly by a much younger and stronger dog down the road, but he accepted this indignity in a way that wasn't cowardly, as if it were somehow in the normal order of things that the puppy he had earlier taught to play was now bouncing him around quite badly.
I see where you're going with this. Yeah, my father and I, and my son and I, to be, to cut to the chase, have a competitive thing, had a competitive thing, and Rufus and I still have a competitive thing, and I think it spurs us on to work a little harder. It's unfortunate because it can also create tensions and conflicts in our lives and our ability to love each other. When my first record came out and my name was in the newspaper, and I got attention, my father enjoyed it, but he also kind of hated it. Because although hate is probably, it made him uncomfortable because he wanted the attention himself because he was a known entity. And the same thing happened to me when my kids, stepped out, particularly my son, who's done very well. It made me uneasy.
And well, he must have regretted giving you his name, and you must have not liked that much either. I'm just guessing, because you went out of your way. Rufus could not be more distant from Loudon, really.
Yeah, there was a discussion about calling Rufus Loudon IV.
Yeah, I bet there was.
Which fortunately for everybody, we didn't do, and we went with Rufus. Three strikes and you're out.
Was it really seriously considered?
My grandmother wanted it to be, this whole Roman numeral thing is a bit ridiculous. But I still use it, It's my name.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's part of the sort of preppy image.
Yeah. And I embrace that image, yeah.
Yeah, and that was kind of, that can't have been the easiest thing in the world to have chosen that kind of a stage persona at a time when all your competitors were essentially pretending to be, down home country Appalachian folk people, or else they were, wearing spangled bell-bottom jeans and being all glittery.
Yeah.
And you came out as yourself, or as a version of yourself. Brooks Brothers, preppy, unapologetic.
I think that was a good choice because it set me apart from the way the other people looked with the bell-bottom pants and the long, the mullet haircuts or whatever they had. All of a sudden, a guy walked out with a Brooks Brother thing and short hair. So right away, oh, what could that be?
How does you brought this up, but are there particular ways that you think that your relationship with your son are echoes of your father's relationship with you? I would guess that that your relationship with Rufus has been a lot of trouble, but not as much trouble as yours with Loudon too. What do you think?
Well, my dad died at he was only 63, so we never really quite got to even yell and scream at each other the way we probably should have. Rufus and I are yelling and screaming at each other all the time, and you know, storming out of restaurants, and that's part of the process of I think of forgiving each other and kind of fighting it out. The other thing is that Rufus, you know, I have 3 of my 4 kids are musicians, and they're really good, important musicians and singers and songwriters. Rufus and Martha, and then my daughter Lucy, whose mom is here tonight, Suzy Roach, is a great singer and songwriter, and so the whole family can get together and actually do stuff together in the context of performing in music. My father and I couldn't sit around and jam, you know, but when I play music with the kids or with their moms or everything, it's a good, nice thing. I almost said healing. Maybe it is too. I don't know.
It's healing for people who aren't in your family, so why not for you and your family? Yeah. I've been to some of those.
Yeah, no, people love to see it when we all perform together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're sort of a and the legendary kind of Wainwright, McGarrigle, Roach, etc. clan. Does everybody know that that Loudon Wainwright III and Leonard Cohen are grandfathers of the same child?
There's a chapter in the book called "Me and My Mechuten." My friend Chaim Tannenbaum helped me on the translation of that. But yeah, Leonard and I, Rufus has a daughter with Leonard's daughter, Lorca Cohen. Our granddaughter is Viva. Viva Catherine Cohen Wainwright. And she's a force of nature.
Now, you write in the book about your sojourn in San Francisco. I guess it began a little bit before the Summer of Love and went on for 3 or 4 years. Was it? How long did it go?
It didn't last that long. I dropped out of college in about 1966, and then I was wandering around. I had taken LSD in college. My friend George Gerdes, who I write about in my book, who's a songwriter and an actor, and one of my oldest friends, was my guide on my first acid trip. And then I saw the Grateful Dead doing a free concert at the Tompkins Square band shell, and then the next week I hitchhiked out to San Francisco in time for the Summer of Love. But I was a hippie for about 1.5 years. It all came crashing down when I was busted for possession of marijuana in Oklahoma City in 1968, and that was people weren't. My father, who had to come over from London and bail me out, wasn't happy, but then I did have long hair at that time, but then I got a haircut and I started to write songs. Oddly enough, and that was kind of the beginning of the start of my job.
Yeah, I was there too for a few months, and The Human Being was the last event I attended. But here's a confession: I never took LSD until I was about 50. And I'm wondering, and you mention it in the book. You mention having taken it and taking lots of acid trips, but you don't really say anything about how they affected you, how they made you different, how you would have been different if you'd never had any of those trips.
Well, I do talk about moving over into the subset of hippies that became interested in Eastern meditative things. which I think was good because, if you start, I was in a yoga ashram. I studied macrobiotics, and taking drugs was frowned upon. So in a way, I was saved by my spiritual pursuits. But
so you never messed with the bad ones.
I had a bad acid trip, didn't we, Darl? I had a bad acid trip with her in New York, Suzy. I wrote a kind of jokey, funny song about it called "The Acid Song," but it was the last acid trip I took, and that was probably in 1976 or 7. But I had stopped taking it, and then we took some acid. But I just happened to have some acid tonight. I think we should all get high, including you.
Well, it's about time.
Yes.
Now, what about other interesting substances? You didn't mess with the opioids and those, or did you? Because a lot of musicians do, just because being on the road is so grueling.
Yeah. Alcohol was my the drug that I
of choice.
But I'm taking opioids now because I had back surgery. I'm high on opioids. But I wasn't. Fortunately, I was not drawn to the serious, scary drugs. I mean, I would do a line of cocaine if it was around. This is really a tell-all thing, man. I didn't know we were going to get down like this. I'm kind of straight at the bottom of it. I'm conservative and a little scared. So I never messed with heroin or large amounts of cocaine.
And politically, you're not conservative, though, are you?
No, I'm not. I'm ashamed to say that I was kind of apathetic when during the Vietnam War. I was living my hedonistic hippie lifestyle, but certainly now I'm not conservative.
Well, you weren't exactly conservative then.
I wasn't. I was just.
So how did you beat the draft?
I got a psychiatrist to write me a letter. Apparently, I'm a socio-psychopath. Can you tell?
Certified by the U.S. government.
Yeah. No, I had been drafted. I write about it a little bit. I joined after I dropped out of college, I decided to join the Airborne. And the day that I was supposed to go down to Whitehall Street and get sworn in, I overslept. And then I thought, what the hell am I doing? And I called the guy at the Peekskill Draft Board and said, no, I'm going to take my chance with the draft. Then I got drafted. Then I went to the shrink, and he wrote the letter.
That was a pretty radical turn from going airborne.
When I left college, I didn't know. I was kind of lost, and I thought for a minute or for a while that I would toughen up and jump out of airplanes in Southeast Asia. So glad I didn't do that.
So are the rest of us.
Yeah.
Can we talk about let's talk about some other people's music for a minute. Do you listen to all kinds of music?
I don't. I am very particular about what I listen to. I don't like. Is anybody here from FUV? I mean, they've been very good to me over the years, but I don't like to listen to other songwriters. And I think it started out in the beginning that, I mentioned Bob Dylan. I listened to a lot of Bob Dylan before I started to write songs, and other songwriters, Richard Farina and Phil Oakes and Jesse Colin Young, and but once I started to write songs, I kind of made up my mind to not listen to other songwriters, whether they were folk or I didn't want to hear the David Bowie records. I wanted to try to be my own person. So now that I am my own person, you'd think that I could go out and listen to FUV a lot, but I listen to jazz and I'm starting to appreciate classical music more, and Gilbert and Sullivan, although those guys were songwriters. But I feel safe with them.
Yeah, they're songwriters, and so are all the Broadway geniuses.
Yeah,
well, some of them would probably have become singer-songwriters if that had been a thing.
That's true. Yeah, I could see them as...
I mean, Hoagie Carmichael maybe comes the closest.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, he's great. God, yeah.
But I can't think of any other real singer-songwriters, apart from Hoagie Carmichael.
No, that's a new thing. The first chapter in the book is called My Cool Life, and it's about the birth of the singer-songwriter, which began with Woody Guthrie and Huddie Ledbetter and those guys. And they were different from Lesser and Rodgers and Hammerstein and all those other guys, those teams.
Yeah. Yeah, the only one I've ever heard sing their own stuff is Cole Porter.
Yeah.
You heard any of those? Cole Porter singing Cole Porter?
He wasn't a very good singer, was he?
No. Pretty bad.
Yeah.
But it's still kind of a kick.
Yeah.
I mean, some of the singer-songwriters that we adore aren't such great singers either, are they?
That's true. We've already mentioned him.
Now, there was a period when you were writing topical songs at a tremendous clip.
Yeah.
When was that?
Well, I kind of had a job. It was almost a job. Tom Cole, who is an editor at National Public Radio, this would have been about 20 years ago. And in fact, the first one I wrote was about Bob Dylan. Bob Dylan had just turned 50. And Tom Cole got in touch with me and said, would you want to write a Bob Dylan birthday tribute? And I wrote Talking New Bob Dylan, which wound up on that record History. But for the next few years anyway, Tom Cole I would write to order topical songs, social commentary songs about presidents and Tanya Harding and Jesse Helms, and that was fun. That was kind of like an assignment, homework, and I enjoyed doing those.
And how did those songs get out to the public?
Well, initially they came out on Morning Edition or All Things Considered, but then in the probably around 1992 or 3, I put out an album called Social Studies, which includes a lot of those songs, and those were. I still write topical songs. I wrote a song about Donald Trump.
Oh,
yeah.
Any chance we could hear it?
Would you like to hear my Donald Trump song as a kind of climactic, exciting thing?
Yeah.
Okay. I hope I don't get deported. But
Loudon, would you like me to hold the mic?
This song was written before the election. It was written, a year and a half ago. And it was a joke when I wrote it. It's not so funny now. But I'll sing it for you. I had a dream, I'm not sure what it meant. When I dreamed Donald Trump was our president, there on election night right by his side, his flunky Chris Christie along for the ride. But it gets worse. Wait, there's more. He made Jeff Sessions Secretary of War. Just like he promised, he built him that wall. He blew up Cuba and he carpet bombed Montreal. I had a dream, I woke up in a cold sweat. The Donald was elected in a huge upset. He made a bad deal with Putin, a secret pact with Assad. He told the Pope where to go. I swear to God. As for the Supreme Court, Trump got to choose. He filled the vacancy up with Lion Ted Cruz. His face was bright orange, his hair was just weird, but we were made great again, embarrassed and feared. a dream, and here's how it went. The Trumpster was elected our president. His little finger on the button, he was doing his thing. Our new national anthem was My Ding-a-Lang. We were bought and sold like in Monopoly. He had the most hotels in the land of the free. Locked up the opposition and the demonstrators too. That would be me, and it might be you. I had a dream, I'm not sure what it meant. I dreamed Donald Trump was our president. Wasn't even close, he won it in a landslide. Our new hot first lady, she was beaming with pride. If you think that's cool, don't fool yourself. He made Ben Carson Secretary of Health. Sarah Palin Secretary of Stealth. If you think that's scary, just you wait. He made Newt Gingrich the Secretary of State. Steve Bannon the Secretary of Hate. Dreams come true in this prophecy, and sometimes a nightmare is a reality. Thank you. Are we doing the questions thing now?
Yeah, if anybody has a question, just raise your hand, and I will do my best to bring you a microphone. This one.
Had you not heard that?
No, I hadn't heard that. That is absolutely astounding. That was written before the election?
Yeah. Yeah, I got it.
You really hit the nails on the heads there. Woo!
Damn nail.
I mean, you had some of the right cabinet members, maybe in different jobs, but yeah.
The Steve Bannon thing was a rewrite.
Yeah.
But originally it was Rush Limbaugh is the Secretary of State. And in the long run, he probably is the Secretary of Hate.
Yeah.
So I love all your songs, but one of my favorites is the Tanya Harding song, and it's about celebrity, but I also feel it's about class resentment. I'm wondering, did you think about that consciously when you wrote the song? I particularly thought of it when you sing about Trump. There's a lot of overlap.
Yeah, I mean, I'm aware of the class consciousness aspect. You know, I talk about she was from the wrong side of the tracks and being from trailer parks, and she was funky, you know, which for me was one of her. I liked Tanya Harding, actually. I thought she was for that, I guess. And I mean, I don't think it was a good idea to do what she did. But that's a good example of, and I talk about it in the book, about how you start out writing something, and then the song can make a shift. And in the end, you know, I kind of am getting laughs and moving along, but then it kind of addresses the issue of how something like ice skating is fun and a beautiful thing for little girls, and then it turns into this pressure, patriotic, money, you know, win-win-win thing. So I think that's the strongest aspect of that particular song.
Anybody else have a question? I'll start here and then I'll come over there.
I too love all your songs, but I'm actually most moved by the later stuff about your family.
Yeah.
Could you have written what you wrote about your dad and performed it while he was alive? I find that as a writer, it's easier to write about people after they're gone, honestly.
Yeah.
I wondered if you felt the same.
I think after my father died in 1988, and I think I had, you know, there's the record that I made that year and that he did hear, although he was sick and in the hospital when he heard it, was a record called Therapy. And there's a song on it called Your Father's Car. And I think that was kind of a beginning of something. But you're right. After he died, I was freed up, in a sense, to really write about him and me and us and it, you know. And that record, History, was the next record that I made, which is full of him, that record. Thanks.
Got another question over here.
Could you always turn a phrase as a kid growing up? I mean, were you surprised yourself when you're writing your first album and the second album, and by the second album, a style had emerged?
You know, I didn't think I was going to be a writer of any kind. I was pretty sure I was going to be a performer. I knew I wanted to be a performer, and more specifically, an actor. So when I wrote songs, I was really almost shocked that they were good. You know, the first one wasn't very good, but then I wrote a bunch very soon after that, and they were good enough, I realized. And then I had that validated when I went out and performed. But it still kind of, yeah, I didn't want to, it wasn't that I didn't want to be a writer, I just didn't think it was going to, in the cards.
Were there a couple, or can you name one that where you hit upon something and you're like, oh, I'm going further, you know, one particular song where you say, like, this is a green light, I'm going to go of the early stuff?
Well, the first song is this song called School Days, which is about this boarding school that I went to that my father also went to and was unhappy at. And I think that was the kind of the first solidly good song. And it has pride of place as being the first song on the first of my records.
I think it's on History. I'm not sure, but there's a song where you're doing a duet with your daughter.
That's actually on a record, the record after History, which is called Grown Man.
Grown Man, which is
Yeah.
a incredible record for a man to starting with you in the shower, right? Isn't that?
Yeah.
But I do remember that at one of the I'm paraphrasing now, but I think at some point in the song you say, "Dear daughter, this is just a song, it's not me," or something to that effect. So
Yeah.
what were you, so partly is what were you saying there, and how do your children, do they interpret your material as your little reflections on the relationships, or they see them more as creative takeoffs from real life?
Yeah,
Or?
you'd have to check with them, but that song is called the Father-Daughter Dialogue, and I sing it with my daughter Martha. And I wrote, you know, we'd had a very ferocious argument about songs, and her side of the argument basically is, well, Dad, you write all these songs like Pretty Little Martha and Daddy Take a Nap, and you write about your kids, but you're not really there. I mean, literally, I wasn't. I wasn't there for 3 out of the 4 of my kids. I was either on the road, or I was living in England, or I was not there. So she was kind of calling me on that. And then the second half of the song is, so she sings the first half, and then I sing the second half, which is kind of about, my argument is, well, because we were talking about the songs, and I said, well, the songs aren't really who I am. They're a version of who I am. It's kind of an act. But, in a sense, her side of the argument is almost stronger. And that my side is a little bit of bullshit. But it was my record, so I had the final say. I got the second verse. Yeah.
Any other questions?
I'm glad you asked that question. I love that song. And I sing it with my dad when I can. I was able to read just a little bit before you came out here to talk to us of your book, and I know that you talk about how writing a song is sort of like fishing, right? So you wait to catch the fish. But I'm just curious, you're going to sit down and you're going to write a song. Tell us about it. Like, what's your process? How do you sit down and come up with a song? Do you write the words first? Do you write the music first? Do you do it together? Do you have a beer?
Do I drink and write? No. I may have had a beer the night before, or several. Yeah, I talk about it being like fishing. It's waiting for me. There are songwriters, and great songwriters, who get up every day and I'm going to write a song, you know. But I never did that, unless it was for NPR and they said, we need a song about Tanya Harding or Bob Dylan by Friday. Then I realized that I could do that. I could write to order and deadline. But usually I write the songs if something grabs me or upsets me or amuses me or pisses me off. I can get a little thing like a line, and it's usually the words first. And then if it's good, and to jump to the fishing analogy, if something is hooked in a way, then it just happens. It's mysterious. I can't follow why or how something will come up, a line, and you think, wow, that's good, you know. I think this happens with writers, you know, you can be surprised. It's mysterious. It's not automatic writing, but it is mysterious, and it comes from some place outside of yourself through you. And that's exciting.
We have time for maybe one more question, if anybody wants to be brave.
Do we have time for one more song?
We sure do. What do you want to hear?
Let's get some suggestions from the crowd here. What would you like to hear? Yeah.
And I also didn't write it, and I don't know it. That's our song on the Charlie Poole record that I made, and it is a great song, but I couldn't pull it off because I don't know it anymore. Motel Blues. Swimming Song is a good song. School Days. You want to pick one of those?
School Days.
School Days. First song on the first record. All right. Have all these authors done book events here, these guys? In Delaware, when I was younger, I would live the life obscene. In the spring, I had great hunger. I was Brando, I was Dean. Blaspheming, booted, blue-jeaned baby boy. Oh, how I made them turn their heads. The towny brownie girls, they jumped for joy. Begged me bless them in their beds. In Delaware, when I was younger, I would row upon the lake. In the spring, I had great hunger. I was Keats. I was Blake. My pimple pencil paint I'd bring to frogs who sat entranced. My drift dream ditties I would sing. The water strider danced. In Delaware, when I was younger, they thought St. Andrew had sufficed. In the spring, I had great hunger. I was Buddha. I was Christ. You wicked wise men, where's your wonder? You Pharisees one day will pay. See my lightning, hear my thunder. I am truth, I know the way. In Delaware when I was younger. Rick Hertzberg, holy cow, man. Good questions.
Well, of the few authors in here who are on the shelves and have done events here, I can say very few, if not none, have done something like that for us. So thank you so much, Loudon. Thanks for being here. And thank you for your questions, and thank all of you for coming as well.